I love this.
It is a beautiful book
It needs to
cover.
be on display everywhere. Um, the super awkward thing, obviously, about doing a live is that some of you are joining live and some of you are watching this. So we're going to have this slightly awkward. We're waiting for people to join, but I don't know. I'll just get into it. You ready? Should we get into it?
Let's
Okay.
do it.
Okay. So quick preface for everyone who is joining. Maybe you caught the written interview that I did with Alex. Maybe you didn't. So I'm going to just give a little bit of preface. So hopefully some of you who are watching this are familiar with the insanity of my stressor map. And on there's sort of this very wide stressor node that I've titled Social Narrative and Cultural Expectations. And when I read Alex's book, Motherdom, I was like, oh, good mother myth. That falls into this bucket. And then reading it and talking to Alex and doing our interview, I've been rethinking how this shows up as a stressor and starting to think of it more as an overlay over the whole stressor map, meaning that it's not a specific stressor. It's like a stress amplifier, I guess. And because it has this amplification role, it just like makes everything worse, but also it's unnecessary, right? It's
Yeah.
unnecessary. You could just
Yep.
take it off. You just take it off the
Yeah.
map altogether.
Yeah.
And so that's why I really appreciate the way Alex writes about good mother myths in her book and the approach she takes, because it's really about identifying not only what the good mother myths are, but where they came from in a way that really breaks down their power. Um, then, yes, how they show up, and also the solutions to clear them out. And at a personal level, but also on a cultural and societal community level. Because again, so well aligned with everything in the Internal Stress Project, this isn't a you problem, solely a you problem. This is an us problem. And we have a lot of work to do at a very broad structural and systemic and cultural and societal way to decrease the stress for every woman and every birthing person and every parent in general. So, okay, that's a little bit of an intro. I'm not gonna, this interview that we're gonna do, I mean, interview, for those of you who've read my interviews, you know that I just have conversations. I don't know if I actually interview. But this conversation, let's go with that. It's not too much of an overlap with the written interview that we did. It's like a companion piece, because I feel like Alex and I were talking about this right before we went live. Like, we could do this once a month and tackle like a very specific area of the parenting journey every time and have a new topic for every conversation. Maybe we will write in if that's something you're interested in. But today, what we want to focus in on is especially the postpartum period, because one, this is an especially physiologically vulnerable time. It's also a psychologically vulnerable time, especially if this is your first baby. You're very new to motherhood. You're very prone to hearing good mother myths and thinking they're true. And they're also incredibly unnecessary. So how do we really see where they are, see how they show up, and see the damage they're doing so we can just get rid of them, right? Okay, Alex, now it's your turn. So to kind of, I mean, one, I'd love for you to just intro good mother myths in
Yeah.
general, and then kind of transition that into one of the biggies, one of the broad ones that really affects, I mean, everyone across parenting, but it's really shows up in that postpartum period, which is the myth of the self-sacrificing mother.
Yeah.
So tell us all the things.
Yeah. So good mother myths. Good mother myths are basically an assortment of narratives, ideologies, stereotypes, directives, which say to mothers what you should or shouldn't do, and also crucially, how you should feel or how you shouldn't feel.
Mhm.
Um, and the spectre of the sort of good mother casts this shadow over all of us, but the good mother myths sort of tell us what the good mother should or shouldn't be doing. A really important thing to know about them is they're contradictory, and we can go on to talk
Hmm.
about that in the context of
Yeah.
sleep in the postpartum period, because you can hear really different things about sleep, for instance. um, they are fashioned by experts, and I think one of the things which is really interesting about our current era is that those experts aren't necessarily doctors or scientists, but
Should we
influencers.
go experts? Should we do
Yeah.
that?
Oh, total square. Yeah,
Experts? Okay.
total
Yeah.
square quote.
Yeah.
Um, and how these good mother myths have their power, how they're enforced, why they're so potent is there sort of two pillars to it. And one is, if you do this thing or you don't do this thing, you're going to harm your baby, you're going to harm your
Hmm.
child. And I think in that sort of hyper vigilant postpartum period, people are really vulnerable to that, really vulnerable to
Hmm.
the idea that if they do something or don't do something, it's going to harm their baby. Um, and then the other pillar is what I call unmothering, which is a concept which I discovered from Black feminist scholarship, which is the fear of having your child or your children taken
Hmm.
away. And you don't have to sort of dig very deep below the surface. I think, again, particularly in the postpartum period, where people have this real fear of like, I'm a bad mother, and if people think I'm a
Yeah.
really bad mother, I'm going to have my child taken away. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting to tee it up that way because good mother, the opposite of that is bad mother.
yeah,
And there's not the an appreciation for the gray space or even that either end of the spectrum is not true,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why the good enough mother concept, which is Winnicott,
Mhm.
has real, that's had real sort of popularity, because it's a way of kind of resisting both of those, like, that binary of like good or bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you had mentioned sleep, and sleep is one of an interesting thing about especially when you think about it in the context of stress,
Yeah.
because it has this bidirectional relationship with stress where, sleep is recommended if you for a stress reducing strategy, and lack of sleep can cause stress. And what are you missing most in the postpartum period? You're losing stress, you're losing sleep and you're stressed. And so but there's and I've written about this, and you have a great some great things in your book about this. Sleep has this prioritization issue, right? When it comes to the self-sacrificing mother, because, on one level, like lack of sleep is or loss of sleep is somewhat inevitable with a newborn. Like a lot of times newborns don't sleep that well and they wake up and they scream and they need to be fed. And so, but we have this, and then, with especially with the lactating parent, the person who's nursing is the one who's going to say, well, I'm feeding, you don't have to get up, I'm the one who's feeding,
Hmm.
which, is fine, but it kind of has this cycle where you don't challenge that as the priority,
Hmm.
especially if you are in even especially extreme, not extreme cases, but at risk for something like, say, a mental health disorder. Like, and this is, an interesting thing, the way that I've written about it and the way that you've written about it. Like, eh, what I found was there was actually an article that it's called The Sleep Prescription,
Yeah.
journal article. And it's just if you're at risk for postpartum depression, and it was focused on postpartum depression, you need to prioritize your sleep,
Yeah.
whatever that looks like. And where you really see the self-sacrificing mother is that sleep, just prioritization of sleep
Yeah.
is not even a point of discussion,
No,
right?
no, 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 exactly. And I think you've written about this, Molly, as well. So if people have feeding issues, it's kind of like, okay, well, you just need to wake your baby up every 2 hours, and there's no
Mhm.
kind of consideration of the impact that that might have on the person who's having to wake up every 2 hours. I think the other thing around sleep is the whole issue of bed sharing, where there's just
Mm.
you know two different camps which have these, wildly opposing views. In my experience of working with new parents, bed sharing can work really well for some families, and actually I get more sleep that way. And for other families, it's like, no, I just lie there really paranoid that I'm going to sort of roll over my baby. And it's kind of like there's no like one right way to do it.
Yeah.
But because it's so loaded, how your baby sleeps, how much they sleep, making those decisions is really hard, and whatever you're doing, you're going to be doing something wrong, right? So if you're you know there's the kind of attachment sort of Sears kind of school of thought, which is wear your baby, sleep with your baby, and then there's like your baby will die if you sleep with them kind of school of thought, and it's really
Hmm.
so polarizing, and it's really hard for people to try and navigate that. And it's really just, it's like what works for one family doesn't work for another. But you don't have that sort of discourse. It's very,
Hmm.
very polarized and all or nothing. And all the kind of content that you see on social media about baby sleep, well, I'm not all I'm slightly generalizing, but it's about try this, do that, wait windows. It's not about what can you do to be
Hmm.
getting more sleep, to be getting more rest. And I think that absolutely should be the focus, because as you say, like
Yeah.
the link between sort of mental health, that we know there's a strong link between tiredness and postpartum depression, for instance. And it's just one of
Yeah.
the simplest things you can do to protect maternal mental health,
Yeah.
is sleep and rest.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that we talked about, again, we talked about too many things before we hit the go live button. I was like, "Oh, we should have saved it," but we'll bring it up now. Um, the way that, you know, the self-sacrificing mother, the concept of it, or at least, the way that it gets lodged in your brain starts so early. Like, it's
Yeah,
not a postpartum thing. Like, it starts even probably when you're trying to get pregnant, right? It's
yeah,
there when you're pregnant, and then it almost really could congeal during the birth experience because of how decentered the
yeah,
mother is in her own birth. And,
yeah.
even thinking about how that carries through, and we can talk about what that looks like in birth, but how that carries through, the thing that came to mind is, once baby's out, even when you're getting a baby out of your body, right? There isn't like this, there's less recognition for the physicality
Yeah,
of the event that you've just been through. Like, you are very much a patient because your body has just done this incredible thing, but also dangerous and monumental. And like, it just the physicality of recovery, but also internal recovery, external, all the things, and the psychological shift of entering motherhood,
huge.
not and that's not
Mm,
even considering all the hormones trying to get themselves back to
mhm.
balance. And so just this again, a deprioritization, but
Yeah,
the language that's used in the birth room, leading up to birth, after birth, like how that just creates this message of
yes,
self-sacrificing mother as a
yeah,
good mother.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, yeah, like you say, in the birthing room, and how the woman, the birthing person, is decentered, because it's kind of like all that matters is that the baby's okay. It's about
Mhm.
getting the baby out. If you're selfish, I mean, people get called selfish if they want a
Crazy.
physiological birth. People get called selfish if they want a cesarean section. um, and this idea that if you have, your autonomy just doesn't matter, your agency doesn't matter. It's like, don't be selfish. It's not about you. Um,
Mhm.
People who want to have, what's sometimes called a natural birth, or a sort of, what I would just call a sort of, physiological vaginal birth, get sort of mocked for being, oh God, how pretentious, how crunchy.
Mhm.
People who want to have a cesarean section, it's like, oh, you're a wimp, and there's all this judgment around birth. And it's kind
Yeah.
of like, hang on a sec, can we not just take a step back? And people have all sorts of valid reasons for wanting a particular type of birth.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like, let's understand that, let's respect that, let's support that person in whatever birth they would like to have. And we know that things don't always work out in birth, it can be sort of unpredictable. Um, but this idea that it's all about a healthy baby, nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Who are you? Who Who do you think you are?
Yeah. Who are you? All that matters is a healthy baby. And you're like, but I mean, I'm here too, and I'm going through
Yeah,
something huge. And also,
yeah,
I mean, I think, you know, the devaluing maybe is not the right word, but the ignoring, I guess, the importance of the birth experience
yeah, yeah,
for
yeah,
long-term health too, and just
yeah,
how powerful it is to feel emotionally supported
yeah,
in that moment, and
yeah,
that requires being centered, and so if
yeah,
you feel decentered, if you feel unsupported,
yeah,
it's not a healthy approach to birth, but it also, again, like, kind of feeds into this, but that's how birth is. This is because a good mother
yeah,
puts her baby first, and
yeah,
so
yeah,
let us we will do what we need to do to
yeah,
make sure this baby is good and healthy, and,
yeah,
it kind of comes into this. I've talked about this like risk analysis where it's like absolutely zero, 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 zero risk to the baby without
yeah,
any consideration of what
yeah,
the risk of that decentering of the mother
yeah,
looks like,
yeah,
in this especially long-term sets.
yeah,
So, 'cause
yeah.
it tracks through, right?
Yeah, and I think that's such an important point, about this kind of looking at the risks, and like the tiniest risk to the baby is completely unacceptable, but a
Mhm,
huge risk to the mother, to the birthing person, is okay. And it's like, well, it's not okay. Um, and actually, it's quite if you look at it sort of historically, where where childbirth was much more dangerous, and mortality rates were much higher. When people had a choice, the mother would be prioritized over the baby, because
mhm.
the mother is a more kind of valuable and, again, scare quotes,
Yeah,
kind of person in that community than a baby that might not survive. So it's interesting how that risk calculus has kind of gone from that extreme, to the other. Um, and the way in which risk is used as well, it's like, well, you wouldn't want to run that risk, would you? And it's like everything is risky. Life is full of risk. I cross the road, and there's a risk. You're never going to eliminate risk, but a lot of the sort of dialogue around, um, I think, around sort of birth, mothering, early parenthood is, we can't tolerate any risk to the baby,
mhm.
even if it has a huge impact, on the parent. So a good example of that actually is around sleep, like safe sleeping advice. So
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
you need to be with your baby when they're asleep. And that leads to people saying, I can't, the baby's asleep in the Moses basket, so I'm just going to sit in this darkened room, even though I really want to have a shower, even though I really want to have something to eat.
mhm.
And it's kind of like, yeah, so that's a really good example, and I think if you look at the evidence around that advice, it's kind of like,
Yeah,
I'm not sure how strong it is, but what about someone sitting in a dark room and they need a pee
yeah,
and they need to
yeah,
go and have something to
yeah,
eat?
yeah, or, I don't know, sleep alone. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's really interesting. I don't know, I just one thing that came to mind as you were talking, especially about the risk, and I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say this out loud, but I'm starting to wonder how much, um, just the concern around lawsuit and malpractice feeds into the current state of good mother myths, because risk to a baby, like, anything happens to the baby, obviously, that's a problem
Mhm.
for the practitioner. Um, and it's almost like a transfer. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud here. Sorry, everybody. But I'm like, is there a weird transfer of the responsibility by
Yeah.
making this a good mother thing,
Yeah.
instead of saying, we're just really scared this is going to happen
Yeah,
because you
yeah,
might
yeah.
sue us. But no, just therefore you should be self-sacrificing. We don't need to dwell on this. I just like saying,
Yeah. No, but it's a really interesting question, and I think, obviously I'm from the UK, but,
yeah,
in my book, I've written about birth in the US and the UK, and they're very different healthcare
yeah,
systems.
yeah.
And litigation hugely shapes, the US medical system, and it's
Yeah.
one of the reasons why birth is so medicalized in the
Mhm.
US, like kind of, constant monitoring of babies, for instance. Um And in the UK, we don't have that same litigation culture, although our National Health Service does pay out millions and millions and millions of pounds a year because of
Mhm.
um, birth injuries and things going wrong in birth. But you still have this kind of culture in both countries of coercion, of the weaponization, I would say, of sort of good mother myths, the self-sacrificing mother. It just kind of plays out in different ways in the different
Yeah.
healthcare systems. But
Yeah.
yeah, the litigation thing definitely shapes things massively. There's I can't remember the name of the book, but I wrote about it in my book, which really kind of
Yeah.
unpicks that and explores that.
Yeah. Yeah. We got a little off topic, so I'm gonna pull us back. Um, breastfeeding.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
This feels like kind of a big one that shows up with self-sacrificing mother and also other drivers of good mother myths. So, and you work with, in addition to being an author, you work with mothers, especially in the postpartum period. So you
Yeah.
see this come up a lot in terms of how the messaging around good mother myths
Yeah.
feeds into the stress of
Yeah.
breastfeeding and
Yeah.
the attachment, not just the attachment to it, but like the pushing through and the self-sacrificing and all the things. So
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
talk breastfeeding as a and the good mother myths that come
Yeah.
into it.
And I think my experience of working with new mothers is that breastfeeding can just cause the most enormous amount of stress, agony. People can get really distressed.
Mhm.
There's almost like this kind of narrative that, oh, you can breastfeed, you just need to try really, really hard.
Mhm. Mhm.
And one thing which I find deeply frustrating is we know that for some people, um, physiologically breastfeed, that breastfeeding isn't, that their breast milk isn't going to be enough for their baby. And we don't even know the prevalence of that. Some people say 1%, some people say 2%. But even if we say it's 1%, so that's one out of every 100, that's still an awful lot of people being told you can breastfeed if you just try hard enough. And they try everything they can. And it's just, it is a recipe, I think, for sort of postpartum mental health issues. Um, so that's one issue around it. Another issue is we say to people, "Oh, you must breastfeed and you must try really hard," but we don't give them any support.
Mhm.
And the thing about breastfeeding is, if you get the right support at the right time, it can make all the difference. So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, you might just want to position your baby a bit differently, or even just the reassurance is like, yep, they're feeding a lot. That's what babies do. Because I think culturally we don't really understand breastfeeding because it gets hidden away in people's homes. So
Yeah.
it's really normal for little babies to feed all the time, and you
Yeah.
think, oh, I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, One of the things which I've asked sort of many times over the years, my postpartum groups is like, what surprised you most about motherhood? And very often people say how long feeding takes.
Mhm.
And instead of having a culture where people are like, it just takes loads of time, just sit on the sofa, put on Netflix, make sure you've got someone to bring you
Yeah.
drinks and snacks, people just think, oh, I'm doing it wrong. Um, The other thing about breastfeeding, some people just really hate it for all sorts of
Yeah.
reasons, you know? It's kind of like,
Yeah.
for instance,
Yeah.
if you've had, horrific things happen to you, if you've been sexually abused, the idea of a baby sucking from you is just, some people just like, if you've got sensory issues, the sensory overload from breastfeeding can be really overwhelming. And we don't talk about that. It's just like,
Yeah.
suck it up. If you're finding this difficult, if you're finding it hard, if you're finding it challenging, then that's on you. You just gotta get on with it.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the traps that you talk about in terms of what sets up good mother myths is when that something is natural.
Yeah.
And that, because I think the important point that you brought up, and I just want to emphasize is we're not saying don't breastfeed.
No.
We're saying we need to consider the nuance and the language we
Yeah.
use and the way we include it in our culture, in our visibility, in the way we talk about it, in the way we talk to our friends about it. I mean, even just as you were saying, one of the things that just came up with my sister-in-law who just had a baby, and I remember this being a thing that I didn't realize was, the time between feedings is from start of feeding to start of feeding, and I'm like,
Yeah.
but if you feed for 30
Yeah.
minutes and you have to feed every 2 hours, you always have a baby on your boob. Like, why didn't anybody tell me that? Right. And it's just this, again, like the language and the visibility of it. And so it's
Mhm.
not, but it's like you need the full platter in front of you of
Yeah, you
how we
do.
talk about it. What are the options? Where do I fit into this? Where does my life
Yeah.
fit into this?
Yeah.
Where do my needs fit into this? Where do
Yeah.
who I am fit into this? Like, it's such a nuanced conversation.
Yeah.
And when you say breastfeeding is natural, you put it in this box,
Yeah,
right?
you
And then
do.
it's just like you close out the conversation.
Yeah. You do, and I think if you're calling something natural, the kind of flip side of that is that people who don't breastfeed are being unnatural.
Mhm.
And the judgment around that. I mean, I think the judgment around breastfeeding is
Mhm.
just
Judgment.
grim.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is. And I think breastfeeding people also get judgment. For breastfeeding in public,
The
if you're
irony,
breastfeeding for
right?
longer than 6 months,
Yeah.
in terms of what's acceptable, it's so narrow.
Yeah.
Um, and it's really, really challenging, and like you say, there's not that nuanced conversation, there's not that kind of like, people make the decisions that are right for them, let's support them in their decisions, practical and emotional support, and we don't do that. We set people up to fail, and actually I think saying breastfeeding is natural, we're not going to give you any support, you are setting people up to fail.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the other thing with breastfeeding that, again, that I think, like, is a good example of one of the drivers of good mother myths is, the concept of magical thinking
Yeah.
and how, again, a trap. Like, I think that framing these all as a trap, it's like we push ourselves into this self-sacrificing mentality because we have, you know, again, stuck with good mother, but also this idea, if I do this, my kid will be a genius,
Yeah.
or everything will go well from now on, or I won't regret this when they're 25, or whatever it is you have this moment in time that you project way out. And I mean, I definitely see this as a way of like managing stress because
Yeah.
anticipatory stress is real. Like,
Yeah.
you are worried about what happens if you stop breastfeeding now and then, they fail a math test when they're a junior and they don't get into the college of their choice. I
Yeah.
should have been breastfeeding for
Yeah.
a full year. Like, you project that forward.
Yeah.
That's anticipatory stress and it's unnecessary. So,
Yeah.
can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about magical thinking and really
Yeah.
how it shows up in breastfeeding and
Yeah.
anywhere
Yeah.
else
Yeah.
with good mother
Yeah.
myths?
So magical thinking is it, you find it in all human societies, and it's our tendency to try and find ways to control things we can't
Yeah.
control. So a really good example would be, I'm going to wear my lucky socks when I go and see my favorite team playing. I'm going to do a rain dance because I'm worried about drought. Um, and it's about trying to influence the future by doing things which
Mhm.
aren't really connected to the future. And
Yeah.
like the example of the I'm going to wear my lucky socks is like, obviously that's not going to make any difference to how your team
Yeah.
plays, but you feel that sort of sense of control.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we all want our children to grow up to be healthy, to be happy, to have fulfilling lives. That's a really understandable thing that we want because we
Yeah.
love them.
Yeah.
And so we're really susceptible to any sort of messaging, which is like, if you want your kid to be okay, you need to do this. And breastfeeding is such a good and powerful example of that. Um, and the claims that are made in relation to breastfeeding, I mean, it's just massive overclaim. It is magical thinking.
Mhm.
And this idea that if you breastfeed, then your kid's going to grow up and they're going to be really smart. They're going to, like you say, they're going to get into the right college and they're going to be sporty and they're going to be this and they're going to be that. And we even see people making claims about breastfeeding in sort of broader terms, like breastfeeding can solve poverty. And it's like, no,
Yeah.
it can't. What? And there's a quote I've got in the books, someone from UNICEF who actually said, breastfeeding can sort of level out the disadvantages between children born in wealth and children born in poverty. And it's like, no, it can't. Like, how on earth can breastfeeding do that?
Yeah.
Um, and that is just magical thinking. So I think, in terms of decisions around breastfeeding, and there is evidence around illnesses and things like ear
Yeah. In the
infections and
short
things
term, it
in
makes
the
a lot of
short
sense.
term.
Yeah.
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 But in terms of the long term, so much of
Yeah. A lot can
what
happen
this yeah, yeah,
between
exactly. So
breastfeeding
much
and college.
happens.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
so much
yeah,
happens. How can you trace it back
yeah,
to breastfeeding?
yeah, yeah,
Um And I mean, one of the things I don't want to get into the weeds of the evidence, but one
yeah,
of the
yeah,
things people who choose to breastfeed are different from people who don't choose to breastfeed. And there's a
right.
massive kind of wealth income variable
Yeah.
at play there. So how much of those outcomes
Hard
are
to
due to
study
the
that.
fact that it's
Yeah,
higher income people who breastfeed for all sorts
yeah,
of structural reasons.
yeah,
Breastfeeding is expensive. There's this myth that breastfeeding is free. It's not free. Like, it's only free if you think that women's time doesn't cost anything. People
right.
often spend like hundreds of dollars, hundreds of pounds on, lactation consultants and pillows, and you can't
Yeah,
go back to work if you're, there's
yeah,
so it
yeah,
breastfeeding has a cost, and so there's a reason
yeah,
why it's sort of higher income families which are more likely to breastfeed.
yeah, yeah. Oh, we could talk about that for a while. Just go get her book. I wanna go into, breastfeeding feels like a big one.
Yeah.
Self-sacrificing mother feels like a big one, but it shows up even in the smaller ones that just
Mhm.
highlight how unnecessary some of these good mother myths really are. And one that you've written about recently is tummy time. And this one really, I really got to me because I am, oh my God, doing tummy time with my first was awful. She hated it. It was the worst. I felt so bad that I watched all these other babies like sitting so cutely on their tummies and she would never do it. But like
Yeah.
all the different ways we tried to do all the different tricks for getting adequate tummy time. Like, just and you talk about this in your book in terms of like, if you say more than this amount of time, you're saying that this is the base. If you do
Yeah.
anything less, that's worse. But you
Yeah.
should always do more.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have a quote in your book that really resonated with me. And I wrote it down. It's either you're a bad mother for not optimizing your child's development, or you're a bad mother because your baby is unhappy about the face plant. And I had a face planter, so she was always unhappy when we did tummy time. Um, and I wanna talk to you just, like, the language used about it and where it even
Mm.
comes from, and again, like, that "more than" language, because that
Yeah.
shows up in so much in this
So
especially in
much,
the
yeah.
postpartum time.
Yeah, so I think there's this general thing of, like, the more the better. And so the more you talk to your baby, the cleverer they're gonna be, or the more you do this. And it's kind of like logically nonsense, right? Because there's a ceiling to everything. Your baby's not
Mhm.
gonna have an IQ
Mhm.
of 250 because you talk to them every second of the day, right? There's a ceiling. So it's just logically nonsense. But we accept it because we expect mothers to be devoting all their time to, cultivating their babies. I mean, tummy time was a particularly interesting one. Thank goodness tummy time wasn't a thing when mine were little, because I really think it's the sort of thing which would have pushed me over the edge. Um, so it's a sort of more recent development, but it causes so much stress to people. I've had sort of new mothers saying to me that their partner was giving them stress because at 3 days old they weren't giving their baby tummy time, and it's kind of like, and it's like, if your baby's on your shoulder like that or lying on your lap, they're getting tummy
Yeah,
time, right? And
yeah,
but
yeah.
the sort of normal everyday kind of mothering practices, which are tummy time, we completely ignore and we don't acknowledge. And it's like, it must be this
Mm.
very conscious
Mhm.
thing that you do, and you must do at least 10 minutes a day, and this target. And like you say, that's the baseline, right? So if you
Yeah,
do manage to do 10 minutes a day, it's like, wow, you're still a loser, because, you should be doing. And babies vary so much. And, like you say, you had a face planter, right? And you think,
yeah,
poor little baby, they just want to be held. They do not want to be
yeah,
put on the floor.
yeah, 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 no.
um, and it feels like it's another thing you're failing at. And it's so funny. I've
Yeah,
done sort of various book events, and almost always someone asks me about tummy time, and they all just sit there, just rocking and
yeah.
crying
Well,
about it.
I think the other thing, especially, at this point in time, we get information about what we should be doing
Mm.
in these quick bite
Yeah,
social media posts,
yeah,
right? And so instead of having an hour dedicated to all of these different things,
mm,
our tummy time, like
yeah,
having your baby on your chest and like reclining, that's tummy
yeah,
time.
yeah,
Like we
yeah,
we don't have the space for the nuance. Instead, it's just tummy time is important for development. You should do tummy time. And then you just have a picture of a baby like
Yeah.
on their tummy looking so happy, right? And so I feel like social media is kind of to blame for this too, of just, just not even having, again, no room for like the nuance and the
Yeah.
conversation about what this
Yeah.
actually is. And
Yeah.
so we
Yeah.
get it
Yeah.
stuck in our head. This is the
Yeah.
thing that everyone is doing, everybody.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I'm happy to report my face planter is now 12 and she's fine. She's fine. She crawled, she walked, she's on a swim team. She's fine. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And, and you don't know that at the time though. And you just think, oh
Yeah.
my goodness, they're never going to walk. They're just going to be a vet. And I think what's really interesting about babies, as with adults, is they're all different. They have their different personalities. They have their different, like some babies are really into vocalizing, other babies are really into sort of moving around. I mean, it's just really interesting. Like we're all
Yeah.
different, they're all different. And in terms of like, a baby's physical development, unless you're kind of locking them in a room and just, not they're not getting any, they are going to reach all these milestones.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and ordinary loving parenting, it's one of the things I sort of write about in the book, but ordinary loving parenting is what babies need to develop, whether it's, tummy time or whatever. And this idea that we must consciously
Yeah.
optimize
Yes.
development.
I mean, that's really the crux of it. And that's a really good transition to um talking more about like how do we shake it off? Like especially thinking about it in terms of how it amplifies the stress in this time of life and
Yeah,
how it's an overlay and how it's unnecessary. Like there's a lot of stressors that you're going to encounter during this phase that are
yeah,
absolutely inevitable, like
yeah,
inevitable. But
yeah,
they don't need to be as strong, as heavy as they are when you
yeah,
layer on the good mother myths. So how do we shake them off?
yeah,
What do we
yeah,
need to do?
yeah,
At a personal level, and also, I mean, if we want to go there at this sort of broader
yeah.
societal level.
Yeah. Well, I think so much of this kind of is at a societal level in the sense
Yeah.
of, um, support systems for mothers. I mean, I know the US is particularly bad in terms of kind of parental leave, and childcare in general. So there's just a huge kind of societal part to all of this, and things like decent housing, secure jobs. You have all of those things in place and it's going to be better
Yeah.
for children, it's going to be better for families. So I think that's a really, really important part of it. I think in terms of, at a personal level around the stresses, I mean, one of the things I quite often will say to new parents is what I call the misery test. Is like if something's making you
Mm.
miserable, that's a sign, just
Mhm.
back away.
Mhm. I like
So,
that.
if you're following a social media influencer or if your friend that you talk to is like, "Oh, what are you doing, Tony?" It's like, you know, back away. And
Yeah.
like the tummy time's a really good example. It was making you miserable. It was making your daughter miserable. It's like,
Yeah.
this isn't
Yeah.
working. So it's like,
Walk away. I like
walk
that.
away.
Yeah.
And it's having that, and it's a really, this is so much easier said than done, I think, particularly when you're a new parent, but it's just having
Mhm.
that kind of faith that your baby better than anyone else. You
Mhm.
and the other
Mhm.
caregivers in that baby's life. Okay. It's not someone on TikTok. It's not your pediatrician or whatever. It's that baby. And so it's about really having that faith in terms of what is right for you and your family. And one of the things I've written about is the importance of diversity and variety. I think it's really important.
Mhm.
And I think linked to that is just totally rejecting this idea of optimization. I mean, am
Yeah.
I allowed to swear?
Yes.
It's bollocks.
Absolutely.
It's bollocks.
Oh, that's not even a swear. You could add like, "Oh, it's fucking bollock." Like, I drop F-bombs all the time here. So, yes, it's bollocks. I love the politeness of that word, but yes. Utter
um,
crap.
It's
Yeah.
utter crap, and I think we really need to reject that because there is no one right way. And in terms, again, going back to say, physical development, the idea that every single baby needs to have 10 minutes of tummy time a
Mm.
day to kind of
Mhm.
develop, it's just nonsense. It's real nonsense. And so it's just accepting on a sort of personal level, but also on a sort of societal level, that there is no one right way. There isn't so much such thing as optimization. Let's be optimistic though. We're all trying to do the best and we will make mistakes. And I think also being able to live with mistakes and just go, okay, I
Mm.
didn't get that
Mhm.
right. I think back on
Mhm.
my mothering, I think many things I've done wrong, and my kids are now old enough to tell me all the things I've done
Yeah.
wrong as well, which is always highly amusing. Um, and being okay with that, because
Yeah.
we are gonna make
Yeah.
mistakes,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's life, right? Because
Yeah.
do our children really need to grow up in this kind of perfect Eden where nothing ever goes wrong? How well are we equipping them for the world if they grow up like that?
Yeah. I think we're also just there's something about our generation maybe that we're more attached to feeling like our mistakes are really just fucking everything up, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean, we talked about this in our interview too, that I feel like I'm in this funny zone right now. My kids are 10 and 12,
yeah,
where I know that tummy time doesn't matter. Like I'm over that. I know that I did breastfeed. I breastfed one for longer than the other. Like I don't think it matters. I'm over that, but I'm also like, oh dear Lord, like I'm in the stage where everything I do will set them up to be the humans that they will be forever. And so I have this new, feeling of responsibility for what my role is right now. And
mm,
again, like a bit of magical thinking, because especially now it's like it's their peers that has more influence. And all they need is like a loving home to come, a person. They just need their person and they're loving. Like there's all this, there's a lot of research that shows like just the basics
yeah.
are the key. Like the basic needs met are the key here, not like micromanagement, right?
No,
And yet we have this message of like, this is the most important thing
yeah,
ever,
no,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and I think it is that kind of, ordinary, loving care, and I think a really important question is what gets in the way of that, both on a personal
Mm,
level.
mhm.
I know that when I am really stressed about things, then I am just, I'm less patient, I'm less fully present, all of those
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
So it's kind of understanding what is getting in the way for us that we
yeah,
can do something about. Um, and I think it's also accepting that our children are who they are.
yeah,
Um, you
yeah.
know, I was a nerdy swot, one of my children really isn't, and that I found that quite I was like, I remember saying to them once, I went, "Don't you care about these exams?" And they said, "I do, mum, just not very much."
You're like, we're different people.
Yeah,
Yeah, you have a quote in your book that um I just really appreciate, which is accepting how little power we really have to shape our children's lives.
yeah,
And I think that as a mantra, like if we are present, if we are here, if we're doing the
yeah,
basics, if we are
yeah,
providing a loving home, if we're providing the
yeah,
basics, if we're able to provide, I mean, again, like
yeah,
not everyone can even
yeah, absolutely.
access the
Yeah,
basic. Like that's another,
yeah,
that's a societal level. We don't have enough time to even, maybe that's another one to go
yeah,
into another time.
yeah,
But, really like that's just relieve that weight from yourself that
yeah,
everything you do is hugely consequential, and
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not. It's a myth that we've been fed.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
And I think it
yeah,
gets in the way of the sort of the here and the now,
yeah, yeah,
of enjoying our time with our children.
yeah,
And we're not always gonna enjoy it. We can get frustrated and all of those things, but it's kind of
yeah,
like just enjoying the here and now. And,
yeah,
and I don't wanna be one of these people who's like, "Enjoy it, it goes so fast," because that's really
yeah,
annoying.
yeah,
But, I kind of, because I'm kind of at the other end now, I just think,
yeah,
"Oh, I wish I'd,"
yeah.
I think back to when they were babies, and I think, "I wish I had just been less
Enjoyed
stressed,
it. Just
less worried.
absorb
I
it.
wish I'd just enjoyed it more."
Yeah. That is a really good note to end on. One thing I want to kind of plug, I put this in the interview and I'll have a link to it's not really it's more like a check-in with everybody. Alex and I are planning out a workshop looking at probably the end of this summer, and we're gauging interest in whether what your level of interest is, what days might be best, just general kind of feeling it out. But the idea is really to kind of open this conversation up and think through experiences and strategies when it comes to dealing with good mother myths. And as you said, like, what does it look like to mother in an authentic way that's for you, a very personalized, authentic way? And how do we have these conversations and how do we map the path forward? Did I get that right? Is there anything you want
Yeah.
to add about the workshop?
No, that sounds great. And I just think I know from my own work with mothers and parents just how powerful it is sharing
Yeah.
experiences with each other. It's kind of like, wow, it's not just me. That in itself can be very affirming.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're interested, fill out the form. I'll have a link to the recorded version of this, which will probably go out next week-ish because I'm going to do the transcript and that takes me too long. But yeah, thank you everybody who is able to join live. Thank you for everybody who is watching and made it all the way to the end. Feel free to, chime in and comments when this goes up and we will get back to you and join us for the workshop. Yay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alex. This was
Thank you
so
so
fun.
much.
All right.
Great. Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.